So I decided I'm going to tell a couple of my own personal stories here. My mother's going to help me out on this. Because some of these are her stories and some of them are some stories that happened to her when we lived in an apartment when I was about, say, 7 or 8 years old. Now, the apartments were nice. They're not that great now, but they were nice then. They had a playground, a pool, and all these places that you could go and play and ride your bike and all this other stuff. They were kind of like townhomes. They were 2-story and really fancy and all that good stuff. So anyway, it was me and my mom growing up because my father passed away when I was little. And my mother was going back to school to get her nursing degree. She was a big businesswoman before we lived at this place. And the place was nice looking, like I said. However, there was always this weird feeling in the place. Like, you never felt like you were alone. So, the first story is the first really strange happening that occurred while we lived there. My mother was in the kitchen washing dishes, and I was upstairs playing with my cousin overlooking the sidewalk outside of our apartment. And we always kept the doors locked and everything because, you know, this was when crime rates were starting to go up and all that other stuff in the area. So my mother always had the latch and the deadbolt on. And I thought it was weird that, you know, we looked out the window and we saw my mother's dog. And we thought, oh, well, Mom's just walking the dog. And within a couple minutes later, she comes to the stairs and yells up at my cousin and I if we let the dog out. No, we were upstairs playing with our dolls and stuff. And at first, Mother didn't believe me, but my cousin and I, you know, verified each other's stories. We looked out, saw the dog sniffing around in the grass, and, you know, thought she was out to do her business. And my mother said, no, the latch and the deadbolt was on. One of y'all had to have let her out. We didn't. And that night my cousin stayed over and we were talking, telling ghost stories and stuff. I've always been big into ghost stories, and my cousin was awesome at making up stories. Anyway, we sat and we talked for a while, and then we went to bed. And I think it was about 3 in the morning when I started hearing footsteps coming up the stairs. Now, this was probably the next day after the dog got out, or was let out, rather. And I looked out into the hallway, and I was thinking that it was my mother coming up to her bedroom because it was the first room on the right in the hallway at the top of the stairs. So I get up and poke my head out the door, and there's nobody there. Her light isn't on in the bedroom or anything, and I can still hear the television on downstairs, which tells me that she's still downstairs. And these were too heavy footsteps to be my dog coming up the stairs. So that was weird happening number 2. Now, when I was little, my mother used to collect these porcelain dolls, you know, the really creepy ones you see in movies, and the ones who can get cracked faces and all that stuff. Yeah, my mother liked to collect those because she thought that I liked them. However, I was always really afraid of them, and because she kept them in my room, I tried to avoid staying in that room at all costs, so I kind of took over Mom's room. And it was a difficult night that night, the first night, and this is some months later and all that goodness. And so my mother put me to bed, but she said she had to do some studying and stuff, and then she was going to go to bed. She was sleeping on the couch. I don't know why she didn't sleep in my bed, because my bed was big enough to hold a couple people. Anyway, so I guess I was asleep maybe 30 minutes or so, and I heard this weird noise. It was like a bang, 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 bang against my wall. And it wasn't so much the wall, it was in the room. Like something was being smashed against the wall in the room with me. Just making noise. You know, at first I thought it was a limb outside hitting the window. And I got up and looked, but there was no wind blowing. So I ran downstairs, and I got my mom, who was indeed studying and kind of winding it down to go to bed. She looks at me and she says, "What is it?" And I said, "I heard something in my room." So she comes up, goes to her previous room, which was now my room, and did the usual mother things, looking in the closet, under the bed, behind the curtains, all that other stuff. Typical places where a 7-year-old would consider there being a boogeyman, right? So she said, "Okay, well, there's nothing here, but if it happens again, come and get me, and we'll do something about it." Tucked me in again, kissed me goodnight, left the bathroom light on in the hallway, and went back downstairs to finish studying so that she could go to sleep. And again, 30 minutes later, I woke up, and it was to the banging again. It was bang, 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 bang. Again, I checked the window. There was no wind, so there was no motion in the tree to slam against the window. So, again, I went downstairs, said, "Mom, there's something in my room." So she repeats what she did the last time. Opened the door to the closet, looked in, nothing there, just a bunch of her old 80s shoes and various work suits. And she looked under the bed, nothing there. She said, "Okay, well, there's nothing here. But if it happens again, come downstairs and just sleep with me." I said, "All right, Mom." So she tucked me in again. It was a little longer this time before the noise started, and I woke up. Bang, 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 bang. And I opened my eyes and turned over and looked towards the door to the room, and I could see a figure standing there. Now, you know your parents' shape. In the dark, you know your parents, okay? This was nobody I knew before. It was a guy. I could tell it was a man. He had really white hair, a really white face, but I couldn't really tell features to it. So, you know, believing that blankets are a shield against evil creatures, I yanked my blankets up over my head and counted to 10 before peeking. He was gone. So after that incident, I ran downstairs and cuddled up with Mother on the couch. And in the morning, she went up there to see what the deal was, and there was nothing there. So same apartment, about a year later. We didn't stay but maybe a year and a half. So this was towards the end of our stay there. My mother was sleeping in my room. She actually decided to sleep in my room. And she woke up the next morning, and I heard her talking to one of our friends from church. And, you know, being in Alabama, we're in the Bible Belt, so we believe in a lot of the stuff that, you know, goes on is of the devil. Or that's what I used to think. Anyway, so she's talking hush hush, and, you know, she only told me recently what happened. She was sleeping in my room, like I said, and she woke up suddenly, and she had, the only way I can describe it is like sleep paralysis, but Mother could actually feel something holding her down. And the only thing that got her up from this situation was saying Jesus over and over and over. And when she was finally able to get up, she ran downstairs, got the phone, called my friend, her friend from church, and they prayed all night until morning. So needless to say, we didn't stay there very long, but those are the stories that I can remember of being in the apartment. And then there was another creepy thing that happened while we were there. There was a prison up there near the place, and you know, my mom smokes, and she's always smoked ever since I was little, and she would go outside to smoke. My mother was courteous enough to do that. So anyway, one day she was outside smoking, walking the dog, and she felt like somebody was staring at her. So she didn't tell me anything. Didn't tell me anything until I came to her and told her that I was going to the park that was between my apartment and another set of apartments, and you know, I could walk there over a hill and be there. And I heard something in the woods, and then I felt like I was being followed, and I thought it was one of my friends, you know, messing around with me. So I looked over, and I didn't see anything. I just saw like movement in the bushes and whatnot, and there's like this foliage forest thing that's there. It's really grown up and weird. And so I came back and I said, Mother, there was somebody following me in the woods to get to the park. So this bothered my mother really bad, and she went out there again to look later that afternoon, and she saw somebody in the woods. So she called the cops after hearing about some thing going on the news. And a day later, it turned out that somebody had been living up there and in the woods, and I guess he was some kind of predator or something. But anyway, that was one of the really scary things. You know, ghosts and stuff can't really hurt you, but people can. So those are my scary stories that have happened to me. They're not really all that creepy or anything, but at the time I was really young, so they were really creepy to me. And yeah, that's it.